Guys, welcome back to On One. I am Keely Brazil Cavallo. I'm so honored today to speak with Heather Maude. She is at the center of a case I've been covering for about a year. If you're not familiar with this case, we go over the whole thing and why it's really the property rights precedent setting issue of a generation. Heather has not been able to speak about her case for quite a while. It was really an honor to sit down with her and finally hear from her what this experience was like, what her family's gone through at the hands of the United States Forest Service, and how the Trump administration stepped in to deliver a just outcome in this case. Quick warning, I did have some technical issues on my end with my video. I apologize. Please bear with me, you guys. You can always stream these on Apple Podcasts. On One with Keely Cavallo is the name of the podcast, so that's always an option. But I apologize for the glitch. Fortunately, Heather is loud and clear, and that's what matters. As always, On One is brought to you by Ranch Vision. Ranch Vision is a software program by the ranching community for the ranching community. This is a web-based app. It's a program that allows you to forecast out the future of your grazing operation for up to 5 years, so you can see what's coming and you can strategize for maximum profit. Visit www.ranchvision.io to learn more. You can watch videos there of other ranch users using Ranch Vision to increase their profit by 40, 60, 80%, and more. It's a powerful program. I'm honored to be a part owner. I truly believe in this program, and I'm very thankful that this job allows me to do what I love, which is tell rural stories. So here is one of the most important rural stories of the past few years and maybe many years to come. Here's Heather Maude. Welcome back to On One. I am talking with Heather Maude today. And if that name rings a bell, that's because you're paying attention to alternative media, because you sure weren't likely to hear about their case on the mainstream media. But the Maudes are the young ranching couple from South Dakota who were faced with 10 years of prison time and $250,000 in fines each over a minor boundary dispute with the federal government. Just a couple weeks ago, their charges were dropped by the Trump administration. I'm going to let Heather tell her story in her own words, which she is finally allowed to do after a year under a gag order. But first, thank you so much for joining me, Heather. I'm sure it's just been an absolute whirlwind for you since your visit to DC on, April 30th? So let me just start by asking, how are you doing? How's everything going?
Yeah, as you said, it's a whirlwind, and we want to thank you for covering it. It's nice to finally be able to visit with you and speak with people who have covered this case for us. So we appreciate that. It's been a long year. It's been a long last couple weeks, but it does feel very optimistic. We've made some really big steps in the right direction, and still have a few more to go, but just really excited for everything that has occurred in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you kind of, through the last year, you've really been through hell, and then you're right back to work on the ranch without much of a breather. I'm sure you are still processing everything with your kids too. How old are your kids again?
They're 7 and 9. They're just about to turn 8 and 10.
Oh, okay. So let me just start with a little intro. Can you tell me about yourself, what you do for a living, and your family in South Dakota?
Sure. So I grew up on a ranch in eastern Wyoming, a cattle and sheep ranch, and Charles and I were set up on a blind date by a shirt tail relative of mine, and we got married in 2013. And 3 months the day after we got married, we got to go through the Atlas blizzard, which was a record-breaking storm here in western South Dakota. So this is not our first trial, but we have a cow-calf operation. We background some cattle. We farm both irrigated and non-irrigated acres. We put up a lot of small grains, anything like corn, sorghum sudan grass, like those kind of crops. A lot of times we end up chopping those, obviously always the sorghum sudan usually, but anything like corn, we can go either way with it here because we can be dry and we can get enough moisture to combine those types of crops. We have a farrow to finish hog operation, and we market all of the hogs and then a few of our beef as grain finished beef through our local farmers market. I do the direct to consumer meat business, and I do that in place of an off-farm job, and we kind of transitioned me out of ag media into that as we had our children, because it is difficult to do. I was on the journalism side, and it is hard to do news interviews and compose articles when you have a baby, and my oldest one did not sleep. We're very diversified. This place has been in Charles' family for 5 generations. We are both fifth generation production agriculture people. We love livestock. Charles really loves farming, and we're really blessed to be able to raise our children the way we were both raised. So that's a big deal to us, and that's kind of the season we're in right now.
Man, we could talk about this more later, but whenever I watched you speak on the steps of the USDA building with Brooke Rollins, I just thought, man, the Forest Service picked the wrong family. I mean, you're a beautiful family. You're so well spoken. Your background in media. I interviewed all your neighbors, as you know, covering this, and I mean, no one has a bad word to say about you guys. You're just universally beloved and respected. So, yeah, they really picked the wrong family. Thank God. But so I gave a little recap there at the top of your case, but let's just quickly go through what happened to you guys for people who may not be familiar. Starting on, I believe, March 29th, 2024, about a year ago. What happened on that day and then in the weeks after?
Sure. So March 29th, that was Good Friday. We had U.S. Forest Service Special Agent Travis Lunders and Patrol Captain Jeff Summers show up at our house unannounced and ask if they could visit with us. So we invited them in, sat down at our kitchen table, and Lunder said that he had been given a complaint by a hunter regarding a no trespassing sign on a section of fence that was not on the actual boundary line. And that is going to be on the west side of our private property and our Forest Service allotment. It's kind of like, this area in question is kind of like a block C, and we own the C. And then that center portion is Forest Service, and then the back side of the C is also Forest Service. So he said that we needed to take that down. And then he said that while he was there, he walked across our private property to the east side. So now we're in the center of the C, and he determined that fence was also potentially not on the line, and said that we needed to meet with our district ranger to visit about this. We farmed our side of the fence, and Charles' family has farmed it since 1910. And we said, well, we aren't positive where the boundary is, but if this is an issue, we'd love to work with you and get it resolved. So we set that meeting up. That was May 1st, and Special Agent Lunders was there, and then our district ranger, Julie Wheeler, was present also. And they kind of asked us what our thoughts were. And a real key thing here is that fences in the West are put in practical locations where you can not only build them, but you can maintain them. And this particular fence in question, they have determined they have about 25 acres on our side, and we have around 20 acres on their side of the fence. So we initially suggested that we just trade acres on their side versus acres on ours, have a survey done so that whomever needs to can write a check to the other side for the difference. That's kind of how that May meeting began. Special Agent Lunders then, he asked, well, how would you feel if your neighbor just came onto your property and did whatever they wanted and didn't tell you? And I think I was the first one. I said, well, this isn't that situation. And he asked it again. And my husband replied, well, this isn't that. We've been there since before you guys existed as an agency, and we've always worked with you and gotten along. And he asked it a third time, and it kind of clicked in my brain. I dated a U.S. Marshal briefly, obviously before Charles. But I realized that he was kind of trying to get us to admit guilt to something, and we hadn't done anything. And so I did not raise my voice, but I simply said, do you mean, what would I do if my neighbors came onto my property without my consent and did whatever they want, like you have done to this point? Because he had admitted to going all over our private property. He complimented a spring we had developed, complimented the infrastructure of our pivot that we have on private property, and he did not appreciate that. So things got a little heated for a little bit, but Julie Wheeler said she'd never been there. She'd like to have our next meeting on the actual allotment so she could see it. And we were very for that, because you can still see the berm that Charles' great-grandfather built this fence on, and you can tell it's an old fence. And we were like, absolutely, we'd be happy to show it to you. We had it planted to hay barley at the time. And And she said we should have a resolution option plan in place by the time that crop needed harvested, which we projected to be July 1st. They said it'd take several months to a year to do a survey, but that any of the options that we did would probably require it. So it was just, this was going to be kind of a long drawn out deal. 5 days later, Special Agent Lunders showed up and conducted what he called a survey. We have not seen the results of that still.
That's
It,
shocking to me. I can't believe you
yeah,
still haven't seen that survey. Wow.
yep. And it was a Forest Service crew. And so we kind of question, they have to use the BLM if my understanding is correct to get an authentic survey. But they staked out across this planted hayfield and said that was the new boundary. And at that point, we became kind of concerned. That was a little different than the narrative we'd heard just 5 days previous. So we reached out to various people, including our congressional delegation, and Senator Round's staff did say, yes, this seems odd. This seems a little aggressive. We would like to be in your next meeting. And as it got closer, they couldn't make that day work. So we reached out to District Ranger Julie Wheeler and asked her if we could reschedule it. And then she responded once or twice, and then she quit responding to us. This was around the first part of June. And then on June 24th, Special Agent Lunders showed up at our home and indicted us with separate criminal felony indictments for theft of government property. I think that
Just
was,
a massive escalation, obviously. I mean, just you're talking a matter of weeks here.
yeah, from March 29th was the initial meeting. May 1st was the only meeting we had with the management side of Forest Service, to then trying to reschedule a meeting the first part of June, and then June 24th, criminally indicted. Our initial court date, our indictment hearing, was July 8th. So conveniently, over the 4th of July, we had, I believe, 5 business days to obtain attorneys and try to learn as much as we could about the criminal court system, which we had no knowledge of. We had to get a conservatorship agreement in place for our children, because they can put you in jail at your indictment hearing if you are considered a flight risk or any number of other things. We had to go through a bunch of interviews and stuff with the court. And they asked this whole slew of questions, do a whole interview with you. And we each had to do this separately since we were indicted separately.
Right, you had to get your own attorneys, your own legal representation. Wow.
Yep. So we go to that hearing. That was the roughest week, to sit down with your children who were, just turning 7 and 9 at the time, and explain all of this and what this might mean and what it might mean for them. Explain to our hired man, we have no idea what's going on, but this is what might happen. And went to that indictment hearing, and the magistrate judge revoked our right to bear firearms at that hearing, in spite of, we've never had a firearm related incident, either of us, in our lifetimes. There was no firearm related component to the case. She also stated that we could not speak to one another about the case. And then
Well,
our
and you weren't
attorneys,
allowed to speak to the media, correct?
so we weren't gagged by the court, but our attorneys very strongly suggested we not speak publicly or in any way about it, because anything you say can and will be used against you, and the government means that. So
Okay.
that all rolled out to us on July 8th. And that was that was a tough week.
I can only imagine. So say again, you had how many days, business days, from the date of your receiving these indictments to your court hearing?
I think it was 5 business days. It was because the 4th of July fell in there, but it was basically 1 week.
Oh my goodness. So on that day that Lunders and his team just roll up with a survey crew, I mean, what was that like? What was their demeanor like when they visited your ranch and they're walking all over your private property?
Well, we requested that he swing by the house and ask permission to access our private property. When he emailed us the night before at 4:45 and said, I'm going to be out doing a survey. And we said, well, please swing by the house and request permission if you're going across our private property. And he responded with, please familiarize yourself with South Dakota statute. And he quoted one. So we just observed it from our private property, but there was very little interaction. I believe Charles went up at the end and was told a pretty curt sentence by Lunders, but it wasn't very polite, and that is what warranted the calling of, I believe I called the sheriff to ask about the statute, and I called our congressional representation and just said, this seems very
Yeah.
far from seeking a resolution with us. And then one of the hardest parts was after they left that day, we as a family drove down, walked across this hayfield that they had driven over and staked out through the middle of this hay barley crop. And this is the heart and soul of Charles's family place. They purchased on three sides of these two lots in question in 1910, and they have managed it since. And it is our feed base. And to see that done to the heart and soul of your husband's family legacy, that was a hard road right there. But we did still seek a resolution. We wonder at what point were we providing information and communicating in good faith that we were seeking a resolution and that they were compiling that information to formulate a criminal felony charge against us, you know. But we obviously, there was no intent on our part to do wrong, and so that treatment that day was just a little, it was concerning. It was
Yeah.
concerning enough that we reached out to some different people and kind of just made them aware and asked, is this normal? And then heard, no, it's not. We would like to get involved. And but yeah, that day, that was a hard day. That was a really hard day of just a lot of unknowns, and come to find out there was much more to come. But
Yeah.
walking across that field with Charles was a hard walk.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm so sorry you all went through that. And Lunders is Travis Lunders' name has come up a lot. He's um, had other incidents with others of your neighbors. He has a reputation in the community. He's a special agent for the Forest Service, which, if people don't know, that's sort of a police branch of the Forest Service that they have. He was on your property armed, right? He was wearing tactical gear and with a gun, correct?
Yeah, I don't know what the definition tactical gear, their standard uniform is a bulletproof vest and, a belt where they have cuffs, spray, gun. That
Right.
is what, and I think that's what they wear most of the time. And I question the need for that day in, day out in that occupation. But yeah,
And he served you the indictments as well, correct?
he did. Yep. He served Charles. I wasn't home at the time, but yeah.
What was that moment like? Not to make you relive it again, but just, I mean, did you have any expectation of getting an indictment that day?
No, no, we had been working with a consultant on what our options were to resolve this with the Forest Service so we could just be knowledgeable on what options were out there for us. And, he had worked for the Forest Service prior to going into consulting, and nobody ever saw it coming that we spoke with. It hasn't ever happened, to anybody's knowledge. They've never criminally charged a husband and wife, let alone separately. My name is not even on the adjoining deeded acres, nor am I listed on the allotment as an owner. And so it was shocking, A, that it happened, and it was shocking, B, that they went over after not only the allotment owner and the adjoining private property owner in Charles, but they also went after, I mean, the wife and the mother, and consequently, in my opinion, our family, by going after me as well.
Right. As Secretary Rollins said in her comments at the press conference when the charges were dropped, she said the government was essentially willing to de facto orphan your kids over 25 acres of disputed grazing land. I mean, that is aggressive, is putting it very mildly. And it's important people know, if you don't have experience working with agencies like this, you have a grazing agreement with the Forest Service, and that has to be renewed every year, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
ever made aware that there was an issue or a potential issue?
So we've had an active grazing permit since the inception of the U.S. Forest Service, and it is transferred through two generations of the Maude family. And we have never received an infraction. We've never been told we remain in good standing to this day. Our 2024 permit was renewed without issue. We've communicated in 2025. We use our allotment in the winter, so we aren't turning out this summer. We turn out in the fall when we're done preg checking. and we've already communicated and been told that we expect to go forward as normal this year and just touch base when we're done with our fall work. But yeah, no written letter at any point saying this was an issue, we had a problem. To this day, no issue saying we are not in good standing, and no actual, we've never really been told, it's never been written down and told to us what exactly we did wrong.
Right. You've still never seen this survey, this proof that you're on government land.
We've never seen it. Nope. They put in stakes, and this is a difficult area to survey, and
Yeah.
I don't know that they are right or wrong, and I don't have a problem. We remain open to resolving this. We're now back to that point where we can seek resolution.
Mhm.
But yeah, it is a very alarming thing in America to think that when you are working in good faith with an agency to resolve an issue that is so common that they have multiple ways in which they are directed to resolve it. That's how common this is. They have the Small Tracts Act for exactly this
Mhm.
purpose, to resolve these exact things with these long-standing permit holders, and particularly these ranches that don't sell, so there aren't surveys being done. And so when you can think about a handful of people can decide that they're going to circumvent all of the systems in place, and instead of resolve the issue with the private property owner, they're simply going to destroy the private property owner, that is well beyond alarming, as you said. That is just a very concerning.
Sometimes I'll get comments, oh, well, their fence was in the wrong place. Well, they just moved their fence. Why didn't they know that? You got to think about how big these areas are that we're talking about. You guys are in the South Dakota prairie. This is extremely rural and remote. These fences are older than the Forest Service is. And, things like curvature of the earth are a factor. Things like creeks that move every year, which I know that's a factor here. Accessibility to fix these fences. You're keeping animals in. These fences serve a purpose other than just a boundary. They're keeping animals. So, you have to be able to fix them. You have to be able to maintain them. These are all factors, which is exactly why the Small Tract Act was passed to deal with these kind of things. This is very, very common. I hope that gives some context to people who have questions about this. This is more common than not. I mean, even if you live in a city, your mom said this to me at one point we were talking, you can have a dispute with your neighbor over maybe a couple of feet. Where should your fence be? You might have to resurvey your boundary in an urban setting. Imagine that on thousands of acres of open prairie that was surveyed by people who didn't have our modern survey tools and techniques. So this is just extremely common.
Yes, yep, extremely common. And this was like you said, there was a river, and his great grandfather built this fence up on a berm to keep the river out and his irrigation water in.
Uh-huh.
And that was its original purpose. And another question that comes up, well, let's address that one first. I can't just move the fence. Once you have a fence in an accepted location with the federal agency, we could not just tear this fence out at this point, move it to the line they say is the property line. I can't do that because there's a system of processes in place to do that, as well as the allotment owner and or the adjoining private property owner. And another question we get asked a lot is, well, did we pay to use the acres? And we did. It's the Forest Service looks at your allotment as a whole based on the actual boundaries, not where fences are put, and then you pay on an AUM basis. But our payment included the acres in question, and they accepted that payment every year. So we didn't, you go back to how could you steal it?
Right, right, exactly. And an AUM is an animal unit month for folks who don't know. So you have a grazing agreement with the Forest Service. And the fence lines, correct me if I'm wrong, but those have to be acknowledged as the grazing agreement is renewed every year as the official boundary line. So the Forest Service is implying that they accept the existing fences when they renew your annual agreement, correct?
Right. That's how I understand it as well. Yep.
This is just me speculating. I've never heard that piece about your interaction with lenders where you said, how would you feel about someone treating your land like their own and you know, walking all over it with impunity? But I wonder if that's the moment where things turned. It almost seems like that's that was a bit of an ego moment for him.
Yeah, we wonder that as well. He was not happy, with that, and we did record that conversation. And so yeah, it was, yeah, that did not go over well, and we've wondered that as well. And we'll probably never have the answer to that question. There are other very well and thoroughly vetted speculations that people have come up with that are also potentials.
Mhm.
Some people say that we were the quick, quiet, dirty, small way to establish this as an option before this agency went after large and tracts of land that they wanted for specific purposes. And I have nothing to back any of this, but in watching some of the research that people have done and presented, there are any number of reasons why this occurred. And I think we're just going to have to accept that we don't know why, but we do know the good Lord led us to do this when we did. It's been the same way for 114 years. We are people of faith, and it was very apparent very early on that God brought this to us. And Charles didn't have this same level of comfort, but I, from the onset, felt like this was going to be a long, hard battle, and it was a battle, but that we were going to be okay. And I'm just really blessed and humbled that all the people he brought into our life to get us, to this side of the criminal's charges.
It's become a lot bigger than just you guys. If it was the small test case to normalize this for larger projects, they messed up. I mean, you guys, you become the face of government persecution in some ways, especially of private property owners and ranchers. And we'll talk about that in a second. I do have some questions for you on how this has become a national issue and some of the implications. But really quickly, I just want to, while we're talking about the early days of this case, um, thank God for the amazing women of the Fence Post and Tri-State Livestock News, Rachel Gable, Carrie Sadheim. They broke this story. They got to the bottom of everything. They got the facts. They stayed on the story the whole time. They are incredible. To my knowledge, I don't recall in any of their reporting the Forest Service giving them quotes. The Forest Service, representatives I spoke with, including Jack Isaacs, who I think was kind of the regional ranking manager at the time of your indictments, they did not respond to me. But at one point, they did speak to an outlet called Capital Press. And they said, and I have that article here in front of me, but they claimed that the mods were informed that they were trespassing. They were unable to resolve the matter through administrative means. They were following normal protocol. And at the time, you were advised not to speak. So to protect yourselves against a very powerful and aggressive government, you guys decided not to speak, and you weren't talking to media. But I find it interesting that the Forest Service did speak to media. And I wonder, first of all, now that you can speak openly about the case, what would you say in response? And two, how does it strike you that the federal government, kind of took away your First Amendment right to free speech essentially, and then slandered you to the press pretty freely themselves?
Yeah. Well, not only did they slander us to the press, but it is my understanding that the prosecuting attorney wasn't happy at all the positive press we got. And at one point, my attorney even said, "Well, it has been kind of hard on him." And I have to say that at that moment, I'm not a physically violent person, but I kind of wanted to grab him by the lapels and shake him and point out to him what exactly
Your attorney said
kind of
this about the prosecutor?
yeah, about how the press was kind of being tough on the prosecutor. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, about that very, very convenient statement in one news outlet said by who knows who. Um, the things that I would like to point out is that if you had exhausted all administrative solutions with us for 4 years prior to this, why was a survey needed in 2024? A. B. If you have exhausted all measures of that, why was the managing entity of the Forest Service, who Julie Wheeler is recognized as over these acres, why had she never been to the allotment as of May 1st of 2024? And if you really did do all of this, where is your documentation? Show it to someone. Back your statements up. And I would also point out, this is part of the reason that we see independent press such as yourself becoming so popular, is because so many in the mainstream press no longer care enough to determine facts. They just want the quick, fast, dirty Facebook shares, Instagram likes, X, whatever it may be. They just want the popularity. And that is not the point of the press.
Yeah.
And we have become skewed in that way. And that angers me that they would accept that statement. Anyone would accept such statements without asking any follow-up questions. And I say that as a member of the press who has covered stuff like this. And to say that you would just take someone's word, a general agency statement, and print it as though it were fact, and you would not even attempt to reach out or verify any of those statements, you could have asked any of the questions I just did, or any number of others, and perhaps given a much less biased and more informationally based article. So I would say not only shame on the agency for slandering my name, but shame on any of the media who did not have the wherewithal or just the basic ethics to do your job. And that makes me so mad. And I remember telling my attorney, it was actually Charles's, when we finally got our joint defense agreement together, he asked me something about the press and how this press is all pretty positive about you and Charles, and this prosecutor's worried that you're behind it. And I said, I have a question. He had just finished telling us how about his wife and children. He has a large family. And I said, if you were in my situation and your wife was in charge of the press, would it be a picture of all of your children circulating the globe with that article? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, no, it wouldn't. And I said, well, I rest my case on this topic because my children are. They are tied to this. It is our family photo circulating with all of this. And frankly, it is a diss to me in my capacity as what I do to have all of this misinformation out there, and also to the people who are doing the good work, such as yourself, to try to report it accurately, to say that, I don't know, it would be much more factual and consistent and concise if we were able to speak to them, but we can't. And yet, like you said, the other side can apparently say whatever they want about us, and nobody's even going to check them up.
Exactly.
And yeah, and beyond that, sorry, now now I'm all fired up, but beyond that, the elected officials, I would also point out that as an elected official, you work for the constituents who elected you. And at the very least, you owe those constituents the same amount of time in your office to discuss an issue as the agency that you allow to speak to you about it. And that did not happen with every single one. And that is also a shame.
Uh, so well said. I couldn't believe the number of comments I got citing this Capital Press article telling me, well,
Hmm?
you're wrong because the Forest Service says this. And,
Yep.
I don't believe, and this, you know, is a interjournalism conversation too, but I don't believe in being unbiased. I don't believe that's possible. We're human beings. We
Right.
have our experiences and our backgrounds that we bring to every story. I believe in being open about your bias so people can take you with a grain of salt and make their own decisions, and being as honest as you can and getting the best quote from both sides so folks have the data to draw their own conclusions. But I'll admit that my bias lies with the citizen because the government has unlimited power and a gun and the citizen doesn't. And so I'm always going to be more sympathetic to the citizen because that's ultimately who runs our country. And it is just shocking to see this attitude of trusting a bureaucrat, trusting the government in these cases. I'm concerned that that's the knee-jerk reaction of so many, is to trust the government agency. And to the point about them owning a gun, I mean, not only did they take your First Amendment right away, they took your Second Amendment right. They took all of the guns on your property. Can you speak to what that means, especially for a ranching family in a rural, remote area where you are guarding livestock and your family, the police are far away? What was that like for your family?
Um, I don't even know how to describe what that was like to just, we were made to feel guilty until proven innocent with this. That is how this court system is set up. That is how all the players in this approached it. And to feel that helpless, it felt like the dying of the American dream for us temporarily there. It's like, here's all of these things that America is built upon, right? That our forefathers established. Charles and I's grandfathers fought to protect. And here they are. And we have done nothing wrong. No one can show at that point in the game, they still can't, obviously, that there was no intent to commit a crime. I can't remember how many people in law enforcement have reached out and told us that, where was the intent? So not only did they take our rights away from us, but the basis for which they had in order to reach that level of stripping us of our rights is just, it's shocking. It's still hard to wrap my head around. And all of that culminated is why we stood up and fought back, because we knew we hadn't done anything and this was wrong. I mean, it was just wrong. And we had done no wrong, and we were made to feel guilty. We were treated as though we were guilty. We were stripped of all of these rights, and they attempted to take all that I hold dear and sacred outside of my faith in the Lord in this. That was very apparent that, they were going to destroy this farm and ranch that my husband has worked incredibly hard for, as have his forefathers. They were going to destroy our family. They were going to put us in jail. And our new attorney has said, don't fool yourselves. A lot of people are going to say, oh, you were first time offenders and all this, and it wasn't going to happen. He goes, no, I've seen it happen. And that is what they do. That is why you can't just, even though you can't speak, the injustice of this was very apparent. And I think that is why we saw such an uprising in all of the ag groups. We don't always all get along in ag, but we are so blessed and thankful that they all backed us. They did. They saw this as the fight between good and evil, and they backed us. And Charles said in another conversation, he said, it was like we were at war and people understood that they needed to be our army. And
Yes.
what a wonderful thing. And it was so humbling to sit and watch. But you can't come after all that someone holds dear. And, in my case, when your faith is rooted in the Lord, and not expect them to pray and to stand up and to fight for what they know is true and right.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm into that. You've thanked so many people, you've thanked the representatives in these ag groups, but I keep feeling that there's even a little injustice in you having to do that, because I feel that the ag community owes your family a huge debt of gratitude, because without ever wanting to or asking to, you became the face of what the ag community, and particularly ranchers and private property owners, have come to experience from the federal government over the last few decades. And because of the faith that you have in God, because of your strength, because of your character, they couldn't find anything to stick on you guys. You made a difference for the ag community. So I think we all owe you a huge debt of gratitude for taking this fight to the level that you did. You wrote recently for Tri-State Livestock News, and everyone should read this article. It's kind of some frequently asked questions, but you said one of the questions you get is, how often does this happen? And you said it both has never happened and happens all the time. Overzealous, unnecessary, and unneighborly actions by federal agencies toward private property owners is not new. For decades, they have undermined the very people for whom they work. However, to our knowledge, no one, let alone a husband and wife, have been charged with criminal felonies over a boundary dispute. You're so well said, because this is both commonplace in the sense that ranchers have come to expect constant harassment from the agencies designed to serve the American people and manage public lands for the good of all Americans. But this was a very extreme case at the same time. This was an escalation. There have been some rumors about a land grab. This area is near a proposed wilderness corridor. All the folks on that boundary seem to have had an above average number of run-ins with the Forest Service. Maybe that's just a conspiracy theory, but in the absence of, honesty and forthright answers from the government, that's what we're left with. I don't know if you can speak to that at all. It'd be total speculation, but what do you think about those rumors, and just the fact that those rumors are out there? What does that say about the federal government?
I think that I haven't dove into this, obviously, the way some people have, but they were able to find a great deal of information to back what they were saying. And so, again, it is speculation. We do know there was a proposed wildlife corridor. Our neighbor, Scott Edoff, went all the way to Washington, D.C. to shut that down before Charles and I were married. And it is true that there is an abundance of issues in our area. And we can go down any number of rabbit holes here, but I think this is the modern problem, is that we have these outside sources of money, and we are now in a position where they can partner with the government to seek their end goal. And that, I'm not saying that hasn't happened in other ways, but I don't think we've ever seen that occur to the degree that it is today. And so regardless of whether that is an issue here that we are facing in our community or not, it is an issue. We do know that the government does this in other areas. And so we do all need to be aware and watchful and mindful of the fact that it is not a conspiracy theory in the general sense. It is truth. It does happen. We have seen it play out in other places. And we are firmly committed to having our farm and ranch in a position that should either of our children want to seek production agriculture, that we can aid them in doing that. I think we all have a decision to make, particularly our parents' generation, as they are aging out, transferring out. You need to be very mindful of the fact that the highest bidder, there's always been this issue of, you can seek money or you can choose other things, but you need to be mindful of what is behind the money that you are choosing to accept and what the future is going to look like based upon your decisions. Because I think my parents' generation holds the key to the future of ag in their hands, frankly, as they transition out and we see which direction they all take. Because there are those of us that want to be in production ag, but I don't know I don't know that I could name a half a dozen people my age who own and operate their own farm and ranch independently like we do. They are always in partnership with their parents, their grandparents. They're managing it for someone. They're working their way in. So it is our parents' generation that hold the key to this. And it is imperative that you realize that whether it is happening right here or not, it is happening. And you're going to be what tips this scale one way or the other in combination with a lot of other things.
Yeah, think about those agreements. Think about who's offering you money. Think about your legacy. I mean, that's a big responsibility that, our generation doesn't have a ton of control over. And the changeover in ag land in the next few years is, I think you're right. It could be truly a turning point for our country.
Yep, it's huge. And we see that on one side of us. And I would just like to say there is a lady who just passed away in our neighborhood as well. And she worked it into private ranching families. So it can be done both ways. And we see that right in our area. And I'm most excited about the young man that she worked into. And I don't know the details, but I am beyond thrilled to see a young 20-year-old hardworking young man be given that opportunity over a paid government entity or paid partnership with the government, the Nature Conservancy, any of these other organizations. I mean, it's fantastic to see, and our communities need that. Both our rural and our urban communities need those 20-year-olds in production agriculture.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the case, this hard year you've had. Finally, you guys had some good news pretty recently. I mean, this all happened fast. What was it like to finally hear from Brooke Rollins? Who was the first person that you heard from? What was that moment like that you knew that someone was going to step in?
Well, so we've had hundreds of people call over the last year and say, you need to call this person. And a month ago, we had one call and say, you need to call this guy. His name's Brett Tolman. Okay. So I did, and he didn't answer. And week 10 days later, someone else said, you need to call this guy. So I did. He didn't answer. And then 2 weeks ago on Wednesday, he calls me back. And he's like, I'm sorry, I've been busy. But he goes, I'd like to help you. I'm like, okay. And he said, I just have a couple questions. He said, was the fence built in your lifetime? And I said, no. At the youngest, it was built in 1950. He goes, okay. And am I reading this right, that we kind of have some overzealous characters in combination with the usual government BS? And I said, I'd call that pretty accurate. And he said, well, I think we can get this dropped. And I said, okay, well, we do have a lot of information going to the new Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins. She's requested it, and we're sending that up via these channels. And he's like, oh, she's a friend of mine. And I was like, oh, and this is just totally a God thing. And he's like, well, let me see what I can do. And he calls back and he's like, yeah, I've been texting Brooke about it. And you're right, she's aware of it and we're working on it. I think we can get this taken care of. I'm like, okay. That was Wednesday. Friday morning, he calls and he says, the criminal, it's dropped. It's done and it's gone. And you might come to DC, but I think he said that on Wednesday, that might come to DC. And on Friday, he's like, the case is dropped. He said, don't mention anything. Let's just let it come down through the channels. Like, I've got to tell my mom and my mother-in-law. Mothers deserve to know um, these
Yeah,
things.
definitely.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, yeah, you can tell him. So that's Friday. Friday afternoon, my other attorney, my criminal lawyer calls and he says, well, I've got good and bad news. They're dropping the attorney general's office for South Dakota might be bringing civil. But the criminal part is gone. And we said, okay. And we continue to wait to see how that civil part plays out. But so that's Friday. We carry on. Saturday, we brand. Sunday morning, we're sitting there with our post branding cup of coffee, looking at the roasters and the crock pots on the counter. And Brett told me, and he texted, he goes, well, do you have your tickets to DC? And I'm like, no, I don't. And he's like, you better get them. So book the trip Sunday, plan it Monday, fly out Tuesday, find out, that, and we don't understand the court system. We aren't people that deal in that realm at all. And so we're just a little overwhelmed. And Wednesday morning, we're wrung out, we're tired, we're just wondering why all this hullabaloo if we're still potentially not through this. And Brett says, well, I don't feel like you guys know what you've done. Do you know what you've done? And we're like, well, no, we don't really feel like we've done anything. And he said, well, only 5% of criminal cases are ever dropped. So he said, you have accomplished what is nearly impossible here. And he said, they were going to throw you in jail. They were going to destroy your family place. And he said, you need to pause today and you need to celebrate this win. And we're like, oh, okay. So, I mean, just the emotions, that emotional high of, the Lord brought us this impossible situation that's never occurred. And then we receive the impossible outcome, right? And that's all just because of his will. And that I felt that comfort in my soul from day one, that's how it would play out, but Charles didn't. So the emotions right then and this is on the way to this press conference. We roll into the USDA. We meet Brooke Rollins outside. She pulls in as we do, and she is just as personable in person as she comes across when we watch her on our media outlets. She hugs us. We get rolled into the USDA into our own room, and we meet the people that were standing with us up there, and they say, you can say a few words. And so then we meet these people, we take a picture, we go out, we do this press conference. We sit down with Brett and his partner afterwards to kind of discuss our goals for the resolution and just kind of answer questions. And it was a whirlwind and it was crazy. It was Secretary Rowland's first press conference. She pulled it all together from like Friday through Wednesday. I was really impressed with the effort of her staff, to pull that off. It was covered live. And then we followed that up on Monday. I have to give a shout out to Caitlin Glover. She is the executive director of the Public Lands Council. I called her and I said, here's what's going on. And I want to meet these few people while we're in DC and you're one of them. Do you have time to meet with us? And she goes, well, yeah, I'll meet with you. And she goes, do you want me to set up the others? And I was like, oh gosh, that'd be great because I'm washing socks and trying to get everything gathered up here. And bless her heart, she set up meetings with some of the key people that had helped us over the last year. So we spent that day doing press and meeting with them. And the next day I did the same thing. And then we took a day and we took our kids and we did some sightseeing with them. We got to see Mount Vernon. We went to the zoo. They'd never been on a plane prior to this trip.
True ranch kids.
Yeah. And they had wanted to, and we'll see what they take away from it. But, Kennedy, she bantered with Senator Rounds, and Harriet Hageman let them vote for her on the Congressional House floor. Like they all were they were just as wonderful in DC as they had been the year prior, but obviously we were all in much higher spirits. So whirlwind, so many big emotions on all sides, and such a huge step in the right direction. We aren't finished. We go back now to where we were May 1st of last year, where we can now seek a resolution to this issue. We can't use the land when something like this happens. So we didn't get to come home and Charles did not get to go back to using it. And it's dry in Western South Dakota. So we're really hopeful for a timely resolution so that perhaps we can use it this year. But, it's not over, but that was such a huge step. And we celebrate the Trump administration as well as all the people that helped us get both to that administration and then to those steps at the USDA.
That's amazing. I mean, that's such a short timeline. So did Brett represent you guys. He took on your case as your attorney on that Friday when he called you. That's what he.
Yeah, he took it on pro bono, and I don't think ours is the normal situation where he happens to know the Secretary of Agriculture. I think he had
Right.
a direct line of communication there that perhaps not everyone would have. But yeah, he took it on. He seeks justice in these kind of situations, and we've met a lot of attorneys through this of all different calibers, and I have to say that he is impressive in what he does, and we're just really thankful to have had the chance to meet him and that he was willing to take this on and just how much he's accomplished so fast. And so that was also just a God thing and he found us because a mutual his neighbor was telling him about it, and he actually saw one of your reports on Instagram, and that is how he heard about it.
That's
Is
awesome.
he watched your coverage of us, and then had a gentleman building fence for him who is from north of us a ways, and asked if he knew us, and he said he didn't, but we had mutual people we knew in common, and they got us in touch with him. So
That's really
yeah,
cool. Well, and I saw
yeah,
he offered to take on more cases for farmers and ranchers in similar situations, which is amazing. So, thank God for that. And not only did Brett, represent you, offer to represent others, but because of you guys, Secretary Brooke Rollins announced a portal to help other ranchers facing similar cases of government overreach because of what happened to you. How does that feel that do you feel that God had a bigger purpose in everything that your family went through and is still going through?
yeah, yes. I mean, from day one, when you see something like this happen to us, I mean, it's obviously so much bigger than our little family in Western South Dakota. When, something this crazy hits it. And again, everybody saw it for that this was, we've had more than one person tell us this was the private property precedent setting issue of a generation.
I mean, you sure didn't ask for this, but God doesn't always call the equipped. He equips the called, and you really rose to this fight.
Well, thank you for that. Yep, we felt called to rise. And again, when you've done no wrong, even when you're made to look guilty, if you can stand on your faith and you are a person of character and you know that you did not do anything wrong, and that's also just kind of the way I'm wired. I mean, you go after my children and my family's legacy and all of these things, and that's just and we knew that this would impact people, all people, our children someday perhaps. So of course we're going to stand up and do all we can, and we were just aware from day one. And I am ecstatic that she implemented that portal, because before, you were expected to go up through the actual agency you had the issue with to try to report something. It wasn't always easy to access the USDA or someone in DC. And I have often wondered with some of these issues, how many times were they simply shredded on their way up the chain, and to be able to send this direct to them. I've been telling all of my friends and neighbors and people who have reached out, I said, even if you conversated or told or sent this somewhere before, I would encourage you to do it again, because we finally have a Secretary of Agriculture who says she wants to A, know, and B, she plans to do something about it. And so we have to just assume that none of these issues have ever made it up there before. And I would encourage everyone to submit theirs, because this does happen. This happens all the time, unfortunately. And she needs to be aware of this so that she can effectively do that component of her job.
Yeah. Yeah, and we need a lot more systemic change in these agencies so that no matter who the president is or who the Secretary of Agriculture is, American producers are not constantly oppressed and threatened by an overreaching government. It's so un-American. It's so wrong. And it does seem like there's this pervasive anti-ranching attitude across these agencies. I'm covering other stories involving the Park Service. It's not an isolated incident, even if this is a case of an ego with a badge. He was enabled by others. And Jack Isaacs, it's worth noting, the forest supervisor at the time of your indictment in that area over the Buffalo Gap grasslands, did step down, the week that your charges were dropped, which I think is interesting. And I hope we get a lot more accountability, because this never should have happened in the first place. Obviously, we don't know why he stepped down, but I think the timing is interesting, personally.
Yeah. we find that timing very interesting also that, and there was also not a regional forester over our region when this occurred. So on the management side, you had Julie Wheeler and Jack Isaacs, and then no one above them. And then with Travis Lunders, he stovepipes directly to DC, is what we were told. That's where his boss was. So it is very interesting, and we do look forward to hopefully someday learning more about this. But yeah, the fact that there was nobody in the position over Jack when this all occurred. One gentleman had retired the end of March, I believe, and the next gentleman he did not actively get into his office in Denver until the last week of July. So it is quite interesting when you look at all of that. And
So that was a gap basically in leadership, and your indictments went through very quickly. Your case was like on hyperdrive in that little space of time. That's very interesting. I know I reported on this. People can read more, but you have a neighbor, Frank Bloom, who had a similar situation with Lunders, and he also spoke with Isaacs on the phone after his abrupt survey by Lunders. So interesting to see the same people popping up and sort of this pattern here. I think there's a lot more questions to be asked and answered. But in the meantime, for you guys, your case, as you said, it's not resolved. You get to go back to square one, basically, and kind of figure out this land issue. And you do have civil charges that may be pending. And I know, so if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that weekend that you were told that the Forest Service may have these civil charges, that was the first you'd heard of civil charges at all. So maybe a last minute thing. This wasn't from the beginning. What can you say about that? I know you're still dealing with it, so you're a bit limited in what you can say.
well, I don't know what to say because I don't know the status. I don't know if we are not currently have not been charged with them, and I don't know if they are forthcoming, if that was just a statement, but we're just confident that the same level heads that saw the criminal case for what it was will see the civil also as an unnecessary, and we will be able to just have level heads prevail and simply get this resolved so that we can get on with our lives and the government can focus its efforts on necessary things.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it does just sound like the similar pattern where if one thing doesn't work, they come at you from another angle when you have a target. This just happens over and over to producers where there's kind of a multifaceted attack. And that's kind of what this feels like. So definitely need to stay on this story and make sure you guys get total justice, because the only right end to this case is an apology and then to leave you alone, and hopefully a larger national conversation about what happened to you guys and how we can prevent this kind of un-American overreach ever happening again. Well, Heather, I'm so thankful for you rehashing all of this. I'm sure it's not fun to relive, but I think it's so important to tell what happened to you and for people to know. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything that you think, has been misconstrued or that you feel people should know about this case?
We appreciate your efforts, Keely, in sharing it in the accurate journalism. We got into that a little bit. We appreciate, the American citizen is a hardworking and talented person, and we've seen a culmination of those in where we stand today, and we are just very thankful for that. And like you said, we have kind of become the poster children of this, but we just look forward to resolving this for ourselves, and we're so thankful for this win on behalf of the agriculture industry as a whole. We don't all get a lot of those, and we're just so hopeful that this will culminate and continue to move forward in a positive direction for the American producer. That's and we thank God for everyone that got us here,
Yeah,
and we're just
beautifully
praying
said.
He continues to be with us. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's so well said. If you haven't watched the press conference, you need to watch Heather's comments and you need to watch Brooke Rollins' speech, which was powerful. I don't remember the last time I've heard a government agent or a government official just speak so clearly for producers and she tied it to the American Revolution, what happened to you guys. She saw this case for what it is, which is extremely significant. Whether you grow food or not, you probably eat food, you probably care about private property rights. It truly was a win for small production agriculture. And again, you were at the heart of that. I do have to give a shout out to your mom. She reached out to me. One of the stories I did was just an interview with her, and you spoke to the fact that your neighbors defended you, even though they faced retribution for doing so because they're dealing with the same agents you are. But you have those folks rise up around you, and yeah, your mom, such a fighter, so passionate for you guys. Again, never deserved any of it, but just thank you for how you handled it and rising to the occasion.
Yeah, well, thank you for covering it accurately and giving my mom a platform. She's going to be offering basic interview advice for parents when they face this. I know she will, and she'll do great at it. But yeah, we're that is something we should thank. Is I should thank my parents and Charles' parents because they were both you know they did a lot. We kind of held Charles' dad. He is the most knowledgeable living person regarding the land in question, so he was kind of held in reserve in case we did go to trial. But our our parents jointly hosted the South Dakota legislature on the allotment and toured it and answered questions and explained the situation to them. As you mentioned, my parents did a whole press run. That was they just finally decided that enough was enough. And if we couldn't talk about it, they would. And bless their hearts, it's not their place, so they aren't as familiar with it as Charles' father would be, but they educated themselves and they talked to the neighbors, and we do have great neighbors. I'd like to thank them. Trevor Hatch came over and sprayed for grasshoppers for us last year as this broke, and Scott and Vonna Edoff, they introduced us to a lot of great people, and we're just there in any capacity we needed them. Their son-in-law, David Urick, just did a lot. I'm going to forget so many, but we're fortunate. We live in a good place. We have good neighbors. We have good families. And I think that's part of what rallied people behind us is the more that they saw of this and the wider it went and the more our parents spoke and our neighbors spoke, you realize that this is the rural America that everybody wants, whether you live in it or not. We do live the American dream, and people that resonated with people, and they saw it for what it was, that it was an attack on the American dream, and they were willing to stand up and fight for it, and for not only us but all of these people that showed their faces and surrounded us and all that they also stand for. So yeah, it was a powerful year, and it kind of culminated there in DC, and yeah, it was a big deal.
It really was. It really was. Thank you so much, Heather. Appreciate
Yeah.
you, and hopefully talk to you again. Keep on this story. Make sure it ends as well as it needs to. But just thank you again for your time. Appreciate you.
Yeah, we appreciate you too, Keely. Keep it up.